back to Whisper Diaries. It's Alice here, and tonight I'm whispering about something we've all experienced but rarely appreciate in the moment. Those hilariously awkward, unexpectedly charming encounters that become the origin stories of our most meaningful connections. You know what I'm talking about. Those moments when life throws you completely off script, when your careful plans dissolve into beautiful chaos, and suddenly you're sharing genuine laughter with someone who was a stranger just moments before. The kind of encounters that seem like cosmic jokes at first, but later reveal themselves as the universe's particularly clever form of matchmaking. So, settle in, perhaps with a warm drink, and let me share some stories about those moments when humour breaks down our carefully constructed walls and creates space for something unexpectedly wonderful to begin. Let's start with a story I'm calling The Culinary Catastrophe, which comes from my cousin Maya. Like many stories of unexpected connection, this one begins with ambition, competition, and a healthy dose of overconfidence. Maya had signed up for an 8-week gourmet cooking course with a simple goal: to finally master the culinary arts that had eluded her, despite numerous YouTube tutorials and cookbook purchases. What she didn't mention when registering was that her cooking history was essentially a series of memorable disasters. From setting off smoke alarms to creating pasta so overcooked it became a scientific curiosity. The class was small and intimate. Just 8 participants gathered around a large kitchen island with the chef instructor demonstrating techniques before they attempted to replicate them at individual cooking stations. Maya arrived early on the first day, determined to make a good impression and hopefully position herself far from the instructor's scrutinising gaze. Her strategy was immediately derailed when she was assigned to a station directly opposite the instructor, with a clear line of sight to her every culinary move. Even worse, beside her was placed Derek, tall, confident, and clearly experienced in the kitchen, based on his casual handling of the professional knives and easy conversation with the chef about various olive oil vintages. "First time?" Derek asked, noticing Maya's death grip on her chef's knife during the initial vegetable chopping exercise. "Is it that obvious?" she replied, trying to loosen her stance to appear more natural. "Only to another recovering kitchen." "Disaster," he said with a conspiratorial smile that immediately contradicted his apparent expertise. "I've just been taking classes longer than you. This is my 3rd attempt at this particular course." Before Maya could process this confession, the instructor called for their attention and the class began in earnest. Derek's admission had slightly eased her nervousness, but she remained determined to prove herself, especially now that she had a benchmark for comparison directly beside her. For the first hour, Maya maintained a careful competence, focusing intensely on the basic knife skills they were practicing. The real challenge began when they moved to their first actual recipe, a simple French omelette that, according to the chef, would reveal their natural instincts for timing and technique. Maya watched the demonstration carefully, noting every subtle movement and instruction. When they returned to their stations to attempt their own versions, she felt cautiously optimistic. Derek, at the station beside her, worked with focused precision that Maya couldn't help but admire. Despite his earlier comment about being a recovering kitchen disaster, his movements seemed fluid and confident. A competitive spark ignited within her. If he could master this after multiple attempts, surely she could at least produce something edible on her first try. The process started well enough. She cracked cooked the eggs without shell fragments, whisked them to the proper consistency, and heated her pan to what seemed like the appropriate temperature. It was the actual cooking process where things went spectacularly sideways. What was supposed to be a delicate, barely set French omelette with a creamy centre quickly became something closer to an egg frisbee, simultaneously overcooked on the outside and mysteriously liquid in the middle. As she attempted to execute the fold the chef had demonstrated so effortlessly, the entire creation broke apart, creating an abstract egg composition that bore no resemblance to anything French or even intentional. "Oh no," she muttered, aware that the instructor was making her way around the island to inspect their results. From beside her came a sound that Maya initially couldn't identify, a strange, suppressed snorting. She glanced over to find Derek bent slightly over his station, shoulders shaking with barely contained laughter. "I'm sorry," he managed between muffled laughs, "but your face right now, pure tragedy. I've been there so many times." His laughter should have been annoying, even offensive given her genuine distress over her culinary failure. Instead, Maya found herself infected by his amusement, the absurdity of her egg disaster suddenly striking her as genuinely funny. "It looks like something that should be studied in a lab," she whispered back, now struggling to contain her own laughter. When the instructor reached their stations, Derek smoothly slid his perfect-looking omelette to a position where it partially obscured Maya's disaster. The small act of solidarity wasn't enough to fool the sharp-eyed chef, but it created an immediate sense of alliance between them. "Timing is everything with eggs," the instructor noted diplomatically to Maya. "And sometimes the pan is simply too hot." She moved on to critique the next student, leaving Maya with her egg catastrophe and a strange feeling of camaraderie with Derek. When the class ended, Maya was packing up her things, including the recipe booklet for the coming weeks that now seemed wildly optimistic given her performance when Derek approached. "So, survival strategy," he proposed, "coffee shop next door, tea brief, and strategic planning for next week's class." The suggestion was casual, but something about his expression, a blend of genuine amusement and warmth without a trace of condescension, made Maya accept. Despite her lingering embarrassment over coffee, Derek revealed the full extent of his culinary journey. His first attempt at the course had ended after he'd caused a small grease fire during week 3. His second attempt had gone better until the soufflé class, which had resulted in what he described as a crime against French cuisine. "So why keep coming back?" Maya asked, genuinely curious about his persistence in the face of repeated failures. "Because I'm determined to cook one impressive meal for my food critic sister, who's never stopped teasing me about burning microwavable mac and cheese in college," he admitted. "Pure sibling rivalry. Also, I actually enjoy it, disasters and all." His honesty was refreshing, his humour about his own failures disarmingly charming. By the time they'd finished their coffee, Maya found herself looking forward to the next class, rather than dreading it. Week 2 proved no less challenging, a supposedly straightforward risotto that Maya managed to transform into something closer to concrete than creamy rice. But now she had Derek beside her, whispering terrible food puns to break her tension and offering subtle tips he'd learned from his previous failures. By week 4, the infamous soufflé class, they had established a routine of arriving early to review techniques together and staying late to analyse where things had gone wrong. Their disasters became less catastrophic though still reliably entertaining. The competitive spark between them remained, but had transformed into something collaborative rather than adversarial, each genuinely celebrating the other's small victories. It was during the pasta-making class in week 6 that something shifted. After struggling with dough that either stuck like glue or crumbled like sand, they finally produced passable fettuccine. When the instructor complimented their teamwork, Maya realised how naturally they had begun to function as partners rather than individual competitors. "We should practice before next week," Derek suggested as they were leaving. "My kitchen or yours?" The invitation hung between them, clearly about more than just improving their cooking skills. The weeks of shared disasters, laughter, and gradual improvement had created a connection neither had anticipated when they'd first sized each. Other up as rivals. Mine, Maya decided. But fair warning, my smoke detector is particularly sensitive. Their first cooking attempt outside class was predictably chaotic. Maya's kitchen was smaller than the professional classroom, forcing them to work in closer proximity. Elbows bumped, ingredients were spilled, and their attempt at replicating the class recipe devolved into improvisation when Maya realised she'd forgotten several key ingredients. "This is how new recipes are invented," Derek declared confidently, adding random spices to compensate for the missing elements. The resulting dish was surprisingly edible. Not gourmet by any measure, but a shared creation they could laugh about over the dinner table. Somewhere between the cooking and the eating, between the spilled wine and the shared clean-up, the evening transformed from culinary practice to a genuine date. By the final class, their improvement was noticeable, not just in cooking skills, but in how they moved together in the kitchen, anticipating each other's needs and complementing each other's strengths. When the instructor asked them to prepare their final dish, they worked with a synchronized flow that made even their inevitable small disasters seem like part of a well-choreographed dance. "We've created a monster," Derek joked as they presented their final creation. Imperfect, but recognisably what it was intended to be. Two people who might actually be able to cook a meal without requiring emergency services. "I think we've created something better than that," Maya replied quietly. The weeks of shared laughter and gradually deepening connection, having built something neither had been looking for when they'd first picked up their chef's knives. What began as competitive comparison evolved into collaborative creativity, a relationship built on the willingness to laugh at themselves and help each other through inevitable disasters. Sometimes the most genuine connections form precisely when we stop trying to impress and instead embrace the humour in our imperfections. Our next story is The Reunion Mix-Up, which explores how mistaken identity can sometimes lead us to reveal more authentic aspects of ourselves than we might otherwise have shared. My colleague Natalie had been dreading her 10-year high school reunion for months. After declining the first 2 invitations via email, she'd finally succumbed to peer pressure. When her former best friend called personally to guilt her into attending, her reluctance wasn't without reason. High school had been a socially awkward period that Natalie had been happy to leave behind, and she'd maintained contact with exactly 2 people from those 4 uncomfortable years. Now a successful graphic designer in Chicago, Natalie had built a life and identity far removed from the shy, academically focused teenager she had been. Still, the prospect of facing her former classmates brought back insecurities she thought she'd outgrown. The reunion was being held at an upscale hotel in their hometown, a venue chosen to impress and justify the significant ticket price. Natalie arrived intentionally late, hoping to slip in unnoticed once the event was in full swing. She'd spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting her outfit, wanting to look successful and confident without appearing like she was trying too hard. The ballroom was decorated with their school colours and filled with people who somehow looked simultaneously familiar and like complete strangers. Natalie took a steadying breath and headed directly to the bar. "Gin and tonic, please," she requested, needing something to occupy her hands while she surveyed the room. "Make that 2, said a voice beside her. "I'll get this round." She turned to find a man she didn't immediately recognise, tall with dark-rimmed glasses and a confident smile. Handsome in a way that suggested he might not have been in high school. "Thanks," she said, accepting both the drink and the social lifeline. "I'm just working up the courage to dive into this nostalgia fest." "Same," he admitted, clinking his glass against hers. "Jordan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. Natalie hesitated for a fraction of a second. The name was familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. There had been a Jordan in her class, but surely not this Jordan. The one she vaguely remembered had been painfully shy and perpetually hunched as if trying to disappear. "Elizabeth," she said, the name of her roommate's cat being the first thing that popped into her head. She immediately regretted the lie, but couldn't think of a way to smoothly correct it. "Elizabeth," he repeated with a smile. "I remember you." This was impossible, of course, but Natalie played along, curious about where this case of mistaken identity might lead. "To you, I don't think we knew each other well. You sat 2 rows behind me in AP Physics," he said with surprising specificity. "You corrected Mr. Harrison when he made that mistake about quantum mechanics." Now Natalie was genuinely confused. She'd never taken AP Physics. Her science courses had been limited to the required minimum. Either this man was confusing her with someone else, or he was playing some elaborate game. "You have a good memory," she replied, non-committally, deciding to see how this played out. "Well, it was impressive," Jordan continued. "You were intimidatingly smart." The compliment, directed at someone who wasn't her, gave Natalie an unexpected sense of freedom. For this evening, she could be Elizabeth, whoever Elizabeth was. Someone intimidatingly smart who took AP Physics and corrected teachers. Someone different from the Natalie who had blended into the background of high school. "And you were..." She left the sentence hanging, hoping he'd fill in details about himself. "Completely unremarkable," he laughed. "Debate team, chess club, the classic nerd trifecta, missing only the AV club, which rejected me for tangling their cords beyond recognition." His self-deprecating humour was charming, and Natalie found herself relaxing. "Well, you seem to have recovered from the tragic AV club rejection. Therapy and time," he said solemnly, before breaking into a grin. "Actually, getting out of this town was all the therapy I needed." "You?" "Same," Natalie agreed, this detail at least being true. Moving to Chicago was like finally being able to breathe. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, discussing their current lives, careers, and the strange experience of returning to spaces from their past. Natalie found herself sharing real details about her life as a graphic designer, while carefully avoiding any specific high school memories that might reveal her deception. As they talked, Jordan occasionally greeted other classmates who passed by, introducing Natalie as Elizabeth with such confidence that no one questioned it. The freedom of this temporary identity was intoxicating. She could be more outgoing, more confident gracious than she might have been otherwise. When Jordan suggested they escape the increasingly loud ballroom for the hotel's quieter rooftop bar, Natalie agreed without hesitation. The evening air was cool, the space elegantly lit and far less crowded than the reunion below. "I have a confession," Jordan said as they settled into a corner with fresh drinks. "I know you're not Elizabeth." Natalie nearly choked on her gin and tonic. "What gave me away? Elizabeth Chen is currently over by the dessert table talking to our former principal," he said with an amused expression. "I spotted her about 20 minutes ago." "Oh, God." Natalie covered her face with her hands, mortification flooding through her. "I'm so sorry. I just panicked when you seemed to know me, and I couldn't figure out who you thought I was, and then it just spiraled." To her surprise, Jordan laughed. Not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Don't apologise. It's actually refreshing. Most people here are trying so hard to convince everyone how perfectly their lives turned out according to plan. Your approach was much more interesting." His reaction eased her embarrassment slightly. "So, you really don't recognise me?" Natalie Hargrove. Oh my God. Jordan's eyes widened in recognition. "Yearbook committee. Always had a novel hidden behind your textbook in English class." "That's me," she confirmed, surprised and oddly touched that these were the details he remembered. "I had the biggest crush on you junior year," he admitted, the confession clearly surprising him as much as her. "You always seemed so absorbed in your own world. Books, art projects, those amazing sketches in the margins of your notes. I could never figure out how to start a conversation that wouldn't sound completely idiotic." It was Natalie's turn to be stunned. "But I didn't think anyone even noticed me." "I did," he said simply. "But I was too intimidated to do anything about it." The revelation shifted something between them, the pretense falling away to reveal a more interesting truth than either could have fabricated. "So," Natalie said, gathering her courage, "since we're starting over with actual identities, I'm Natalie, graphic designer from Chicago, who avoids reunions because high school felt like being trapped in a snow globe of awkwardness. And you are?" "Jordan Klein, architect from Denver, who came to this reunion specifically hoping to run into the girl who was always drawing in her notebooks, just to see if she became the artist I thought she would." The honesty between them now felt more exhilarating than the earlier game of mistaken identity. As the night continued, they traded real stories about their actual high school experiences, the path that had led them to their current careers, and the strange parallel awareness they'd had of each other despite never really talking. When the reunion officially ended, neither was ready for the evening to conclude. They found themselves walking through their hometown at midnight, pointing out places that held memories, some shared from a distance, some entirely personal. "I'm in town until Sunday," Jordan mentioned as they finally made their way back to the hotel. "Would you be interested in coffee tomorrow? Or dinner, with our actual identities fully disclosed this time?" "I'd like that," Natalie agreed, realising that the mistaken identity that had begun their conversation had somehow led to the most authentic connection she'd experienced in years. What began as an awkward case of pretending to be someone else evolved into the freedom to be more genuinely themselves than they might have been otherwise. Sometimes the detours through misunderstanding lead us to truths we might never have reached directly. Our final story tonight is The Weather Delay, which explores how unexpected circumstances can create connection between people who would normally pass each other by. My former roommate, Rachel, was the kind of person who scheduled precision. Her calendar was colour-coded, her daily routines optimised for efficiency, and her travel arrangements always included buffer time for unexpected delays. She took pride in never having missed a flight, never having been late for a meeting, and generally never allowing chaos to disrupt her carefully ordered existence. This organisational superpower served her well in her career as an event coordinator, but occasionally made her seem inflexible to those who didn't know her well. Rachel didn't consider herself rigid, just prepared. Why invite unnecessary stress when proper planning could prevent it? Her carefully structured world encountered a significant disruption when a January blizzard descended on Chicago, grounding all flights and stranding her at O'Hare International Airport after a client meeting. Despite checking weather reports before her trip, the storm had intensified more rapidly than predicted, transforming a routine business trip into an exercise in adapting to circumstances beyond her control. After receiving notification that her flight had been cancelled and automatically rebooked for the following afternoon, nearly 24 hours later, Rachel methodically worked through her options. Airport hotels were fully booked by other stranded travellers who had moved faster than her. Airline apps notification system, ride-sharing apps showed wait times of over an hour due to the worsening road conditions. While contemplating the uncomfortable prospect of spending the night in the terminal, Rachel overheard a conversation at the customer service desk beside her. "You don't understand. I need to get to Milwaukee tonight," a man was saying, his voice reflecting frustration but remaining surprisingly calm. "My sister's wedding rehearsal dinner is tomorrow morning, and I'm supposed to be giving a toast. I've already missed the bachelor party because of work. I'm sorry, sir, but as I've explained, all flights are grounded until the storm passes." The airline representative responded with the weary patience of someone who had delivered the same news countless times that day. "The earliest flight to Milwaukee will be tomorrow afternoon. What about ground transportation?" he asked. "Is there a train or bus still running? I'll rent a car if I have to. Amtrak has suspended service due to the weather, and I wouldn't recommend driving in these conditions unless absolutely necessary," the representative advised. Rachel found herself paying attention despite her own planning needs. Milwaukee was on the way to her own destination in Madison. If this man was determined enough to find transportation tonight, perhaps they could share the cost and risk. Before she could overthink the uncharacteristically spontaneous idea, Rachel approached. "Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing. I'm trying to get to Madison, and Milwaukee would be on the way. Maybe we could split a ride if you find something." The man turned, revealing a face that looked as tired as Rachel felt, but brightened slightly at her suggestion. "That would be amazing. I'm Eli, desperate brother of the bride." Rachel, equally desperate, event planner who never misses deadlines. She introduced herself, extending her hand formally despite the unusual circumstances. They joined forces, checking various transportation options on their phones. After 30 minutes of research, Eli found a specialised weather-resistant car service with a driver willing to make the journey for an exorbitant fee. "It's steep," he acknowledged, showing Rachel the quoted price, "but split between us, it's not completely unreasonable given the circumstances." Rachel quickly calculated the cost against her emergency budget allowance, a fund she maintained precisely for situations like this. "Let's do it," she agreed, surprising herself with the decisiveness on such an unplanned expense. The car service estimated a 90-minute wait before their driver could reach them. They settled into the least uncomfortable airport chair delay. "So, event planner who never misses deadlines," Eli said conversationally, "how are you handling being at the mercy of weather patterns rather than your carefully organised schedule?" Something about his tone, gently teasing but without mockery, made Rachel smile despite her stress. Currently recalculating every subsequent deadline affected by this delay and trying not to think about the 3 client calls I'll have to reschedule tomorrow. "Do you always plan everything down to the minute?" he asked, seeming genuinely curious rather than judgmental. "Not to the minute," Rachel defended, though she was aware her colour-coded calendar might suggest otherwise. "I just prefer knowing what to expect. Control the controllable, as my dad always said." Eli nodded thoughtfully. "My approach is typically the opposite. Improvise and adapt, which works well in my job as a jazz musician, but less well for making it to important family events on time, apparently. The contrast between them couldn't have been more pronounced. Her structured approach to life versus his improvisational one. Yet as they continued talking while waiting for their driver, Rachel found Eli's perspective refreshingly different rather than annoying as she might have expected. When their driver finally called to say he was approaching the terminal, they gathered their luggage and made their way through the nearly empty airport. Outside, the blizzard had transformed the world into a swirling white landscape that made Rachel grateful they'd found professional transportation rather than attempting to drive themselves. Their driver, a stoic man named Victor, who apparently specialised in weather emergency transportation, helped load their luggage into his modified SUV equipped with special snow tyres and various emergency gear. "Milwaukee first, then Madison," Victor confirmed as they settled into the back seat. "Journey will take approximately 3 hours in these conditions, possibly longer if roads worsen. I recommend seatbelts and patience." The first 30 minutes of their journey passed in tense silence as they watched the snow-covered highway through the windows, the car moving at a careful pace that nevertheless felt precarious given the weather conditions. Eventually, the heating system and Victor's evident driving skill allowed them to relax slightly. "So, what kind of events do you plan?" Eli asked, breaking the silence between them. "Corporate mostly," Rachel replied. "Product launches, industry conferences, executive retreats. Occasionally charity galas when the client is interesting." "That explains the very organised vibe." He nodded. "You must be good at anticipating problems before they happen." "Most problems are preventable with proper planning," she agreed, then gestured toward the storm outside. "Except when they're not," Eli smiled, the expression transforming his tired face. "And that's when life gets interesting." Something about his perspective, finding interest rather than anxiety in disruption, intrigued Rachel. "Is that the jazz musician philosophy, embracing the unexpected?" "Pretty much," he confirmed. "In jazz, mistakes often lead to the most interesting places musically. Some of my best solos have come from hitting a wrong note and having to find my way back to the melody through an unexpected path." As they continued their slow journey through the storm, the conversation flowed more easily than Rachel would have anticipated with a stranger. Eli shared stories about his life as a touring musician, the unexpected venues, the memorable audiences, the challenges of making art a sustainable career. Rachel found herself sharing her own journey from corporate employee to independent event planner, her initial terror at leaving stable employment, and the satisfaction of building something entirely her own when Victor announced they needed to stop for fuel and a brief break. They found themselves at a small roadside diner that that had remained open despite the storm, one of the few lights visible in the otherwise darkened landscape. Inside, the diner was warm and surprisingly charming, with red vinyl booths and a counter where a few other weather-stranded travellers sat nursing coffee. Rachel and Eli claimed a booth, while Victor refueled the vehicle. "I can't remember the last time I was in a place like this," Rachel admitted, looking around at the classic Americana surroundings. "My usual business trips are all airport lounges and hotel restaurants." "You're missing out," Eli said with mock seriousness. "Roadside diners have the best pie and the best stories." As if to prove his point, he struck up a conversation with their server, a grandmotherly woman named Dot, who had apparently decided to stay open specifically for stranded travellers, rather than leave them without warm food during the storm. By Palmwise, the time their food arrived, Dot was sharing stories about the historic blizzard of 1979 and how she had met her husband when similarly stranded. Rachel watched Eli's easy interaction with Dot with a sense of admiration and slight envy. His ability to connect instantly with strangers, to find warmth and humanity in what she would normally consider an inconvenient delay, was a skill she hadn't cultivated in her efficiency-focused life. When they eventually returned to the car to continue their journey, something had shifted between them. The conversation deepened, moving from surface-level details about their careers to more personal territory, their families, aspirations, significant relationships, or lack thereof, and perspectives on what made a life well lived. "Do you ever worry?" Rachel found herself asking somewhere near the Wisconsin border, "that your improvisational approach means missing out on certain kinds of opportunities that require long-term planning?" Eli considered the question with genuine thoughtfulness. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There's a price to every choice, right? But I worry more about planning so carefully that I miss the unexpected gifts that come from detours and disruptions." He glanced at her with a warmth that made something flutter unexpectedly in her chest. "Like tonight, for instance." The comment hung between them, an acknowledgement that this chance meeting, born from mutual desperation and a blizzard, had developed into something neither had anticipated when they'd first introduced themselves at the airport. As they approached Milwaukee, where they would part ways, Rachel found herself reluctant for the journey to end. Their conversation had evolved into a connection that felt surprisingly significant, given the brief time they'd known each other. When Victor pulled up to the hotel where Eli's sister's wedding party was staying, there was an awkward moment of hesitation between them. "I should give you some money for the rest of your journey," Eli said, reaching for his wallet. "Don't worry about it," Rachel responded, surprising herself with the spontaneous generosity. "Just consider it my contribution to making sure the bride's brother makes it to the rehearsal dinner." Eli smiled, clearly seeing through the practical excuse. "I'd like to thank you properly," he said. "Maybe when I'm next in Chicago for a show, or if your event planning ever brings you to New York." The suggestion of future contact made Rachel realise how much she wanted exactly that. They exchanged contact information with the promise to connect beyond this weather-induced adventure as Victor pulled away from the hotel, continuing toward Madison. With Rachel now alone in the back seat, she found herself smiling despite the ongoing storm, the disrupted schedule, and the meeting she would need to reschedule. For perhaps the first time in her organised life, a complete deviation from her careful plans had yielded something more valuable than efficiency, a connection she never would have made if everything had gone according to schedule. What began as a weather emergency evolved into an unexpected journey of connection across different perspectives, chaos as I bring tonight's episode to a close. I hope these stories of unexpected encounters and humorous twists of fate have brightened your evening and perhaps reminded you of your own memorable meet-cutes. Those moments when life's plans go wonderfully awry and lead us to connections we might otherwise have missed. Before we part ways tonight, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I'd love if you'd rate this episode and leave a comment sharing your own experience with humorous first meetings or unexpected encounters that led to something special. And please hit that bell icon to receive notifications whenever a new episode drops. You can also consider buying me a coffee as a small thank you for my work. Your engagement helps our whispered community grow and helps me create more content that speaks to your experiences. In our next episode, we'll explore new territories with fresh stories to both soothe and entice you. Got a relationship topic you're curious about? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one and love getting your suggestions. Thank you for listening to Whisper Diaries. This is Alice, your guide through the charming complexities of unexpected encounters, wishing you the courage to embrace life's humorous detours and the unexpected connections they might bring. Until next time, sweet dreams, and may your own story unfold with just the right balance of planning